Gas Station Creep on Halloween by Tanya First of Her Name. So, this was 2 years ago on Halloween. I just discovered this sub about an hour ago and decided to post my own encounter. My best friend and I were leaving a club in Dallas, and we stopped at a gas station to pick up some snacks and refreshments. This guy came out and told me I looked very pretty. At this point, I was drunk and not worried about a damn thing, so I thanked him, smiled, and continued looking for munchies. He started to follow me through the aisles, though, and I kind of shrugged it off. Me and my friend paid at the checkout counter and were walking out when he came up behind us and asked where we were going. At this point, I was thinking, screw off, dude. We said curtly that we were going home, and he seemed to take the hint and went away. We started to walk down the street. My friend was planning on driving us home in my car, since I was obviously unfit to drive. My friend wasn't 21 yet, so he hadn't been drinking. We were about 3 blocks from my car when we noticed a car driving really slow behind us. I glanced back a few times and realized it was the guy from the gas station following us. We decided that it wasn't a good idea to lead him back to my car, so we turned around and walked a different way back, towards the street where the clubs were. He made an illegal U-turn and continued following us. He then rolled down his window and shouted to us, asking if we needed a ride. Politely, I said, "No, thank you. We're good. We just made a wrong turn." He continued to follow us. We sped up our pace a bit, and he sped up too. He called out to us again through the passenger window, asking again if we wanted a ride. I told him please to stop following us, or I'd have to call the police. He then called me a derogatory name and sped off. Yeah, what a jerk. You always meet the weirdest people coming back from convenience stores, especially convenience stores, on Halloween. Burning Corpses in a Car Before Halloween by Circet Asen Man. This story happened the night before Halloween back in 2010. At that time, I was a freshman in college, living on campus. That has significance later on. That year, the 31st fell on a Monday, so student festivities went on the Saturday before. During the afternoon at around 7, I was outside playing soccer on a field near to my place when I noticed an SUV driving by several times. I only noticed this vehicle because we were kicking the ball over the fence several times by accident, and that car was present at least twice when we climbed over the fence to retrieve the ball. I didn't think much of it at the time and proceeded to go to the party later that night. My girlfriend and a few friends and I left around 9:30, and we noticed a helicopter in the sky with a bright floodlight attached to it, seemingly scanning the area. We proceeded to party, and I didn't fret over it. The party was on the other side of the campus, and so we missed all the sirens and flashing lights racing up and down the street. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me go back for a minute. We got back from the party at around 11 p.m., and I immediately noticed that not only was the first helicopter still in the air around my campus apartment, but that there was a steady stream of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks driving up and down the street nearby. However, none of them had their lights or sirens on, so I wasn't really alarmed. The next day on the internet, though, I found that an SUV had been found blazing in the parking lot, with a woman's body inside. What was more, I found out this happened about 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile from where I lived. I guess during the party the area was crawling with police and other authorities, all trying to look for clues. My roommate later told me that there were non-stop sirens for a good 20 minutes after I left for the party. In the next few weeks, more info surfaced, saying that a man had killed his wife and tried to burn the body. He broke her neck as well and bludgeoned her body. If the news articles below are to be trusted, slight discrepancies with timing of course, the killer was lighting his wife's body on fire during the exact same time I was getting dressed up in my Woody costume. But it wasn't until a few weeks later that I made a connection between the SUV I saw in the article and the one I'd seen while playing soccer. I found out that while I was playing soccer, someone was driving within 20 yards of me with a corpse in their car, especially since it was on the campus of a very secure university in a very safe city. After reading the article in more detail, the teeth did indeed belong to the victim. My guess is the murderer hit his wife so hard in the teeth that they were knocked into her throat. The Most Eventful Halloween by KRC 1130. The events happened in October 2013. Obviously, since it's Halloween. I was 10 years old and in the 6th grade. Where I am from, the middle schools got out after the elementary and high schools. As a result, my friends and I knew that we would have to start trick-or-treating immediately if we wanted to get any candy at all. Remember, Halloween of 2013 was on a Friday. This really excited us. We could hit every house we wanted and didn't have to worry about school the next day. After school, our parents picked us up and drove us to our friend Alex's house. He lived on a road named South Herald. To the left of South Herald was an identical street named South Concord. At the end of one side of South Herald was a turn that brought you to South Concord. On the other side was the main road. Alec lived closer to the main road, so our plan was to start at his house, go to the main road, then turn up and go down Concord. After that, we'd go back down Herald and return to Alec's house. So we began trick-or-treating. There was probably 12 of us, or so I remember, but the notable ones were Alec, myself, Nate and James. We had been accruing a great deal of candy when we got to this fateful house. It was unlike any other house, 2 stories, a garage, front lawn, etc. However, there was a Michael Myers statue in the front lawn. We went up to the house, got candy, and examined the statue closely. It was holding a hideous knife and was hunched over. James suddenly decided that it would be a good idea for us to kick in the shin and do a little Halloween vandalism. Suddenly, the statue jumped and began holding its shin. We were frightened that the statue was actually a dude. "I'm gonna kill you," said the man. Obviously, plenty of people claim to want to kill someone and not really mean it. At the time, we just assumed that it was an idle threat and continued on our way. At like 8:30, it was pretty dark out. I lived up north at the time, and anyone who lives up there can agree that it gets dark pretty quickly. Anyway, we were still collecting candy when Nate and I began discussing the science behind slasher films, like who gets offered up first and why. One of the people we were with, who was in the middle of the pack, dropped his bag of candy suddenly. We all stopped and waited for him to pick it up. Now, the person had to turn around to pick up his bag. When he lifted up his head, he began to squint as if he was trying hard to see something. We all turned to see what he was looking at, and then we saw the Michael Myers costume walking behind us. It was odd. No one else was with him. Hell, we were the only group on the road. He was still holding onto the knife. When he noticed we were looking at him, he quickened his pace. Being stupid preteens, we booked it. Looking over my shoulder, I realized he was starting to run too. Fortunately for my slow ass, he was a decent length behind us. Our luck even turned more into our favor when a minivan stopped at the end of Concord. It was one of our friend's mothers. We all piled into the minivan and quickly told her that someone was chasing us. She drove us all back to Alec's house. What makes this story even worse is that Alec and Nate told me that the man was still roaming the streets after we had all left. I don't think I really have felt so terrified. Honestly, I have never left the house on Halloween ever since. Whether the knife this guy had was real or not is irrelevant to me. It's one of those things that I had no intention of knowing, just in case it was real and all. I suppose this story pales in comparison to some of the other experiences here, and I'm not really much of a storyteller. Still, I hope you enjoy my misfortune. TLDR, go trick-or-treating, see a dude in the lawn. Later, the same dude chases us with a knife.
The Most Terrifying Halloween Party by Burn.
This happened back in elementary school. I was around 7 or 8. I haven't thought about it too much in the past years, but reading through this sub made me think about this. However, at school, there was the annual Halloween party, where brothers and sisters of my elementary school mates were invited. We've always had lots of fun, eating spooky snacks, etc. I was wearing a vampire costume. I always wore vampire costumes at Halloween, and my best friend Sarah at the time had a strange costume that involved some fake plastic chains, but seemed real because they were quite heavy. Sarah told me she had to go to the bathroom, so we both headed to the bathroom. I waited for her outside the entrance of the toilet. Another couple of girls went into the bathroom, but I didn't pay much attention to that. A few minutes went by, and I started getting very annoyed because I didn't want to lose the party. Another 5 minutes. I was getting ticked off. I returned. I turned around and entered the bathroom. Then I heard the sound of her chains moving around, but I couldn't really tell from which bathroom stall it was coming from, so I knocked on every door. No response. I got to the ground and looked through the spot between the door and the floor to understand where the noise was coming from, and I found it. Strangely, I saw that she wasn't alone in her stall. I raised my voice and asked if she was okay, and who was that other girl in there with her. No reply. I started trying to open her door. We couldn't lock the door, so someone had to keep it closed somehow. I started panicking and screaming, and after I tried with all the force of a 7-year-old I could have managed, I tried to open it slightly. From now on, I have some confused memories, but I will try to explain myself as best I can. I saw the other girl in there, and I knew her. She was the teenage sister of one of our classmates. I asked her what was happening, and she told me that Sarah was having some problems, and that she was helping her, but I didn't hear Sarah anymore. I kicked her ankle and leg and managed to get into the bathroom stall. I was scared as hell and just wanted my friend back. I got into the bathroom and she closed it again, using her back to keep it shut. I looked at Sarah, and she was sitting on the toilet, her face red and the chains around her neck. She was slowly choking. I began to scream, and that awful other girl slapped me. I was sobbing, crying, and basically I wasn't able to move because of the fear. All I could do was scream as loud as possible to get someone else's attention. A teacher finally arrived and got me and Sarah out of there, called our parents in the ambulance, and my parents brought me home while Sarah went to the hospital. It turned out that her brother our classmate, was ticked off at her as well, and her sister decided to do something about it. She was a lot older than us at the time. I still get chills thinking about what happened, but I've never seen the cops talking to my parents at school, so I guess she got away with it. Me and Sarah never talked about it again, and when I try and asked her what happened, she just wouldn't talk about it. Alone on Halloween by Tasha Lou 96. This all happened back in 2014. I went out on a night for Halloween during my first year at university. I was wearing high-heeled boots and a leather jacket. Over the course of the night, drunk me had taken them off and left them at the group's table, due to being too uncomfortable, as I'm sure you can imagine. By the end of the night, I'd practically danced my way to near sobriety and went to my group's table. However, they'd gotten up from the table, and my boots and jacket were nowhere to be seen. Someone had stolen them. Whatever, they weren't expensive, and I rarely wore them anyway. Now, however, I had to walk the 15 minutes back to my accommodation. I didn't have any money for a taxi, so I thought I'd just walk back slowly. I asked one guy, the jerk in the group that everyone hated, if he could just keep me company, because he was tall. He laughed and said no, and walked off, dragging the only girl who was also shoeless with him. So I was walking alone, shoeless in a busy city center, watching out for broken glass or anything that would be harmful or disgusting. Everyone else was so far ahead that I couldn't see them, but I just kept going. I was about halfway to my place when I was stopped by a Middle Eastern man. The city I lived in was very culturally diverse. He asked if I was okay, and I was grateful someone cared enough to make sure I was all right. He offered even to help walk me home, so I accepted for at least part of the way. He was very kind and told me his name was Omar. He started saying how beautiful he thought I was and how lucky he was to have me. This unsettled me slightly. Once I was around the corner from my house, I thanked Omar and said I'd walk the rest of the way on my own. He instantly looked offended. "Don't you want to invite me in for a cup of tea to thank me?" I told him no, because I didn't know him at all. He kept hold of my wrist. "Why can't I have a kiss for helping you?" Again I declined, and his grip tightened. "Well, do I get a hug for being your friend then?" By this point I just wanted him to let go, so I gingerly gave him a hug. Then he grabbed me and tried to kiss me, and I pressed my lips together instead. He just licked up my face. I finally got free and started walking away, but he followed me. I sped up, and so did he. I abandoned my checking for glass on the ground and began sprinting, now terrified as I heard him running behind me. I got out my phone and called my friend Rob, who I begged to help me. But then I found out Omar was no longer following me. He was nowhere to be seen. But I needed someone to keep me safe. My friend thankfully agreed, and he got to my flat not long after, with a knife in case Omar was still there. I told the people in my group my story, and they were mortified that they left me alone. I returned home for a week because I was so thoroughly shook up. Now on a night out, I make sure everyone is so close to me that it won't happen again, or to anyone else.
Creepy Halloween Trick-or-Treating Encounter by K. Malovich.
This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A friend of mine from school and I made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time, I remember thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating, but who doesn't want free candy, am I right? My friend and I figured we still had at least 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us, so we went. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents thought that it was fine for us to trick-or-treat together without any adult supervision. Everything was going great, and we were having fun, getting some solid candy, etc. Then we rang one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on, and there was a pumpkin or two on the door front, so we assumed the people within were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first, I was glad because he was dressed in a costume and happy to see my friend and I, so I felt like we were in store for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed out, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter into his home, which was weird, but we were 13 and didn't really think anything of it at the time. Then he asked if he could take our photos. He said he always liked to take photos of kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kind of creeped out, but I figured it was best not to upset the man and let him take the picture, and then we could leave. So he snapped the photo of each of us, and then he pulled out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He said he liked the kids whose pics he snapped to sign their names so he could know who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just run away, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. So did my friend. The man looked at the paper, looked back up at me, and then down at the paper again. Then he repeated the fake name that I'd written down and nodded. Luckily, after that, he didn't do anything, and we were free to leave, but it definitely creeped us both out. At the time, I thought that he was just an eccentric guy, but as an adult looking back on the story, it seems far more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to both of us, and I hope nothing bad happened to any of the other kids hanging on his walls. Halloween, with all these costumed kids trick-or-treating in the dark with minimal parental supervision, could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes with no one knowing the kids' whereabouts. Please stay safe out there, and happy Halloween. Halloween Eve by P. Sprouse. I actually have 2 stories I'd like to share, but I'm waiting on permission to share the one that happened to my best friend, which I was also heavily involved in. So I'll start with the one that happened to my own family. Back in 2008, I think, I had graduated high school, but was still living at my parents' house, along with my younger brother and sister, who at the time were in high school and junior high respectively. It was Halloween Eve, meaning the next day was Halloween, and we were all asleep in our beds. Now, I have to tell you that although we lived on a nice-ish street, we lived in a town known for gangs and drug deals and random crazy weirdos. It was a little scary to hear gunshots and police sirens in the distance every night. But, hey, it was home. Anywho, about at 4 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot on our front porch, followed by a shouting and violent pounding on our front door. I, being curious, but also scared out of my mind, creeped up to my second-floor window and peered out the front yard that had an obstructed view of the porch. This was all I could see, And aside from hearing a regular stream of cursing and more pounding on the door, I had no clue what was going on for what seemed like hours. But in reality, it probably was no more than 20 minutes. Finally, and quite startlingly I might add, my brother came bursting into my room and asked if I was okay. I told him yes, and what in the name of heck is going on? Also, if you get that reference, you're streets ahead. He told me this. Some weirdo was at our front door. He had knocked on the door, and my dad had heard and went to see what was happening. He peered through the glass and saw a man on our front porch, to whom he asked what was wrong, without opening or unlocking the door. The man answered, "They're after me," repeatedly while glancing back behind him. My dad, seeing that there was no one behind him on the dimly lit street, asked if he would like to use our phone. The guy said yes, so my dad grabbed our house phone and handed it to him through the doorway he had cracked open. The man tried to push his way in, but thankfully Dad stopped him and locked the door. He then proceeded to call the police on the phone the man had opted not to take. That was the story up to that point, when my brother came in to check on me. Isn't he such a nice brother? At that point, the man had started screaming profanities, yanking the door handle back and forth violently, and pounding on the walls. And then I heard the glass shatter. The man had taken a chair from the front porch and thrown it through the front window, which led to my parents' bedroom. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I was bawling at this point, knowing for sure that he was now in the house. And I remember I woke up to what I thought was a gunshot. I thought about how he was going to kill my parents first, and then run upstairs and kill me and my brother. My mind raced at all the horrible things that could be happening downstairs, when amazingly the police pulled right up at that moment. They immediately came into the house and detained the guy. Apparently he had climbed through the window, cutting himself on the glass, and crawled on all fours through my parents' bedroom and through the kitchen. Finally ended up on our living room floor, where he just laid down and bled all over the carpet. He didn't have any weapons on him, and despite my original theory of him having a gun, I guess I thought, in my rudely awoken state, that the pounding on the door was a gunshot. He was apprehended before he did anything to anyone in my family, thankfully. We think he was just a druggie who was hallucinating that someone was chasing him or some shit. No charges were filed, and we never saw the guy again. After the police and ambulance left, my dad cleaned up what he could of the bloody mess, and we all went to bed. Unfortunately, we all forgot about my little sister, who was downstairs in the bedroom in the back of the house. No one had gone to check on her, and no one had told her what had happened after it was all over. So she spent the entire night cowering under her blankets, thinking something could still be happening. God damn. We have since all apologized to her. So that's my story. Even though it was the most frightening experience of my life thus far, at least something good came of it, right? Since he bled all over our carpets, our insurance paid for new carpet, which we already desperately needed, and it was enough to carpet several new rooms. Way more than were actually ruined. So there's that.
Halloween Strangers by Mr. Evil Guy.
It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. with lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick or treat with us, and I said sure, fine, and we carried on together as a little group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend of my daughter's from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the little girl, so I tried to start up a small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, eh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but again said nothing. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me, as we hadn't even been out for that long, and their bags were only about a third of the way full with candy. In any event, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing was that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and had said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any kid friends like you do." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turned out, she was not a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What was even more disturbing was that the old woman started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why my children asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they just wanted to get away from her. Needless to say, I brought my kids home straightway and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy, and fortunately, we didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything, since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was the old woman doing? And who the hell was the man following me around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there like that on Halloween, hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. Halloween Fun by Navy Wife JP. I have more under my belt, but here's a memory from when I was younger. My dad was the coolest guy on the block, probably because he was one of the 3 black dads who lived in our town. The population is around 98% Caucasian, and that's not an exaggeration. He was a state police officer, intimidating, wore Oakleys before the hipsters, and he was generally a rough-sounding person. Damn do I miss him. But the one thing he feared the most was Halloween. He would tell my sister and I stories at night about his life when he was in high school in slums in New Jersey, and that every Halloween, crazy things would happen. He may have been pulling our legs a bit, but at that stage in our lives, we didn't care. When Halloween would roll around, he would take us out while Mum stayed home to trick-or-treat. One night in 5th grade, Lexi and I were dressed as a witch and a 50s poodle skirt girl. Dad held our hands, walking to the last street, when I realized I'd lost Mom's scarf she'd let me borrow. She loved that old thing, so we walked all the way back towards the darker corner of our street to find it. It's by the woods in a small stream, and in the daylight you can see pretty well. But when it's dark, you can't see anything. Dad said he'd seen something and walked towards it. When he'd got there, he started slowing down. He was staring at something in the dark that we couldn't see. Lexi called out to him if he'd found Mom's scarf. He told her to be quiet and started crouching down, looking into the distance. For several minutes, we stood there waiting. I could make out the scarf above his head, tied to a branch. He grabbed the tied scarf, still staring into the dark, and started backing away. Then Dad screamed and sort of shuffled backwards. It was a low, throaty scream like he was furious. He was swearing, but I don't remember what. Whatever Dad had been staring at then bolted out of the trees and ran down the street opposite of where we lived. It was a little child, probably a boy from his silhouette shape, and in a black costume with skeleton bones on the front and a skull mask. When Lexi and I tried to go over and see what happened, Dad yelled for us to stay back. He got onto his ancient cell phone and called Mom to come and pick us up. His next call was to the local police. Lexi and I left before we could see anything, but the next day Mom told us about the dead, skinned animals that had been found. By the time us kids could go look, they'd taped off the place and taken out the bloody animals. But there were still the stains on the pavement, and the smell was absolutely terrible. The kids talked about it in school a little, and I was curious if they'd ever caught the boy. Nothing came out in the local papers, though, and it was quickly forgotten. Eventually, Dad could have told me more, but it was the last Halloween we'd spend together. But I do remember him and Mom arguing for the next couple of days about ever letting us trick-or-treat again.